Hello creatures, welcome back to Bound by Words. My name is Madie. If you are new here, welcome. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell. Today we are doing a writing experiment video based on Miss Leigh Bardugo's The Ninth House. Miss Bardugo is known most often for the Gracia trilogy and Six of Crows, both of which are really popular right now and written in the same world. This book here was published last year and it is all about secret societies, but we're going to be analyzing today some of the wordcraft structure of Miss Leigh Bardugo's writing to see what makes it so good. All my fellow writers out there know that whenever you start writing, we get some pretty general advice from almost every source of basic writing craft building blocks, things that we learn very early on and that we hear consistently through our writing journey. Things like, don't say the dialogue tag said too much, or your writing will sound very scripted. Don't use too many adjectives, or it'll be really flowery. Show, don't tell, describe the setting as you go, things like this. We get these pieces of advice, but not always are we told, like, how flowery is too flowery, and how many times can you say said before it starts getting a little bit clunky. And when we're evaluating our own writing, we tend to be hyper aware of some of those mistakes that we make. So what I did for this writing experiment and what we're going to be going over today is I collected some metadata on the first 30 pages of Leigh Bardugo's Ninth House. Leigh Bardugo is a pretty popular name right now in the reading community. Her more popular series that I mentioned in the beginning of this video were actually published in 2015, and they still get a lot of hype. This is probably her lesser known book, but I have been reading it and I absolutely adore it. So what I did for the first 30 pages is I sat down and I have a whole handwritten chart where I actually counted the number of times she used the dialogue tag said. I counted the number of adjectives she used. I counted the number of times she used the point of view character's name, because she is very famous for writing multiple point of view books. And I counted however many sentences on each page she described setting. So all those numbers were per page, and then I took a general average of those. So we talk about style and writing well. We talk about doing these things too much or doing them too little and it making the writing a little bit distracting. So what I decided to do as sort of a writing experiment for myself is to take this data and these numbers and to compare them to my own numbers to see what happens if I write sections of my book the same way that Miss Leigh Bardugo writes hers. So this data is going to be different from author to author, and the window of don't do it too much can be really broad. It depends on your audience, it depends on your topic, it depends on the page itself. So to all the authors who wondered how many times using said is too much, how many adjectives make it too flowery, how much setting description makes it sound like info dumping, I'm actually using this data to attempt to learn that through some of our favorite authors and famous writers in the community right now. So I have already collected the data on Miss Leigh Bardugo, and what we're doing for today's experiment is I'm going to write the next section of my book like I normally would. And I'm going to see how similar or how different my adjective count and point of view character count is to Miss Leigh Bardugo's. I even set my page size on Word to what most novels are printed at in the hardback form, and it does vary a little bit from publisher to publisher, but in general they're usually around A5. If you don't know how to do that, I will show you how to do that before we begin. But I'm going to write a couple pages of my story, probably about 5 pages, and I'm going to see how my adjective count, how my point of view character count, my said dialogue tags compare to Miss Leigh Bardugo. Do I use them drastically too much? Am I not using them enough? And then I'm going to go back through and I'm going to edit those 5 pages and try to make it as close to the numbers I got from Miss Leigh Bardugo as possible. Alright, so this is what it looks like whenever you open Word. My cursor is right in the middle there. So we're going to go up to the left in the top and we're going to click the Layout tab. Now on the left side of this tab we have a bunch of different options whenever it comes to page setup, but today we are going to click Size. For some reason my screen capture didn't capture the drop down box, but if you go to Size there's an option for several different types of page size. I selected a 5, and this is what a standard novel size page would turn out to look like. So you can select any page size you want, and it doesn't affect the actual typing and using of Microsoft Word. It just shows you the appearance of a different page size. That didn't turn out as as bad as I thought it'd be. I was really convinced that there were some things that were going to be really different, but there was really only one thing that was super outrageously different between like my natural rating and her rating in the 9th house. So these numbers are based on page, like I said before. So the number of times she actually uses the dialogue tag said in the first 30 pages of her 9th house book per page is about 0.8 times. I actually made a note in that column. There were about 10 or so pages, it looks like, that didn't have any dialogue on them. So it seems like she's not really using the dialogue tag said often, but I did make a note and I circled there were 2 pages where there were like bigger chunks of dialogue, and the one she used it 4 times, the other she used it 3 times, just when the dialogue was coming up. So my goal was once per page because it felt like a good middle ground, and that's actually exactly what I averaged for these 5 pages. I used it 2 times on a page, 2 times on another page, 1 time, and then not at all on the other 2 pages. So for adjectives, she actually uses 8.7 adjectives per page in the first 30 pages of her book, and there were some pages that were pretty adjective heavy, and there were some just paragraphs where it seemed like there were a lot of adjectives. I think the most she had on one page in the first 30 pages is 16. Mine ranged from like 5 to 8 per page, so my average was 7.3. So when I go back through and I edit my writing to be a little bit more like hers, I'm going to add 1 adjective per page. The next one is the one that is the most different, and this is the point of view character. So the number of time you say the point of view character's name. So the protagonist in this book, her name is Galaxy Stern, but she goes by Alex, like Galaxy. So I thought that was pretty cute, very unique name, but there are some pages where she said the name Alex 7 times. And whenever I was reading and writing and like marking that, it seemed like a lot, but whenever you're reading this book for fun to enjoy it, you really don't notice it. So in my 5-page average, I say the point of view character's name once per page. That's my average. Her average was 5.6 times. So I guess I'm going to go through and put my main character's name in the book a little bit more, which doesn't really sound like a negative thing, but I'm not sure if I'm really going to like that part of it or not. The last one is the number of sentences she uses to describe setting. Her number was 4. It could be anything depending on how much dialogue was on the page. It could have been anything from 7 sentences to 2 sentences seemed to be the lowest amount. There was one page that had no dialogue sentences whatsoever, and my average was 4.3, so that was pretty close. So the only 2 things I have to go back through and do in this next stage is to add 1 more adjective per page, so 5 more adjectives in this section. It doesn't necessarily have to be 1 per page, but I want to add 5 more in this chunk, and then I have to add the point of view character's name a lot more. Technically, I should say her name 15 times in 5 pages, but that seems way too much. But I'm gonna try it, I'm gonna experiment with it, and then I'm gonna read the finished product and see if I like it. I definitely have to say that the last thing I expected was to not like something that I was adding to my writing, because I love Leigh Bardugo so much, but it sounds so clunky to me to include my point of view character's name that much. I did manage to add her name in 12 more times. I would have had to do 14 or 15 to match with Leigh Bardugo's numbers exactly, but 12, it was like after that I didn't even have a chance or a place to name it. And to be entirely honest, I'm probably going to take a lot of that out. But it was interesting to see how it would change the writing and stuff like that. I don't know if a lot of that comes from the fact that my protagonist's name is Alia, and that doesn't roll off the tongue like Alex does. Alex is so short, it's 1 syllable, it's just nice and concise. Alia is just a little bit longer and a little bit harder to say. So I don't know if that has anything to do with why it feels so clunky, but I didn't even notice while I was reading the 9th house that Alex was said so much. I had instances where I was reading where there would be no dialogue per page, but there would be several mentions of the characters' names because she was describing the setting or describing what she was doing in relation to other people. But this section in the book that I'm working on right now, there are substantial sections of dialogue, and I think that might be why I didn't really have the opportunity to say her name as often, because if I did, then it would turn into the Alia said, Alia murmured, Alia replied, and I don't want to include a whole lot of those in my books. But overall, I do think the adjectives really helped. I think I have a tendency to under-include adjectives and under-describe this setting. So it was really exciting to see that my number for setting was really, really similar to Leigh Bardugo's number for setting, but I think I have to consciously add descriptors like that. Like, I have to think, okay, if I didn't know what was going on, how do I best represent that? And I think that's true for a lot of writers. So we've successfully mimicked the base building blocks of the writing craft in Leigh Bardugo's The Ninth House. This book is also really pretty. If you didn't notice, the snake is like glossy and it actually has risen scales. So this is a really pretty book for bookshelves. If you don't have it, I would recommend picking it up. I think if I wanted to imitate her numbers a little bit better, I would have to do a larger sample of my writing, but this is sort of just a fun little experiment. I think things like this are great to do if you are experimenting with changing or still finding your author voice, but I don't want to mimic her author voice while I'm writing. I do want to create my own, but it is nice to have that comparison because we do hear a lot as writers, and if I'm wrong or you've heard something different, then please leave in the comments below. But we do hear a lot that you shouldn't use the dialogue tags very often, and you have to make sure that you sprinkle the setting in, and you can't write very flowery or it'll be really distracting, things like that. So this was a fun experiment in what that should actually look like. If you have books or authors that you want me to do in the future, then please let me know in the comments below. I'm not sure yet if this is going to be my favorite Leigh Bardugo book. I am very partial to Six of Crows, as I know a lot of people are. She has some very amazing characters in that one, but I haven't made it to the end of this book here, so this might honestly blow my mind. If you have read this book, then let me know what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so I can see you next Monday.